Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna.
Last week, we discussed the evolution of crocodiles and their long history on both Earth and Kaimere. While many Chimeran Crocs surviving to this day belong to clades we are familiar with on our own planet, being semi-aquatic ambush predators, some are quite different. The most recent breakout stars are the crocodiles of the genus Crocodilus. The common crocodile is the Chimeran saltwater crocodile. Though often lumped into the same species as their Earth counterpart, over 1 million years of divergence and adaptation to this new context, some assembly naturalists advocate for their own species designation. They have a tremendous range, spanning throughout the Inland Sea, the Crescent Sea, up to the Neckar coast of both west and east, and around northern Arvel. Salties are also reported along Kyrule's western coast. These crocodiles are highly aggressive. They will often seek out confrontation, especially if the opponent is smaller. As the largest bulls can reach 8 meters, this includes many residents of the inland sea and adjoining estuaries. Saltwater crocodiles are a common sight in beaches near settled areas, and this proximity, coupled with their aggression, makes them among the most frequent predators of Chimerans. Efforts to cull them have fallen on deaf ecological ears, as this merely opens up space for other salties to lay eggs and fill in vacancies, and they are dangerous enough that culling inevitably comes with loss of Chimeran life. Also, they are very resilient animals, and crocodiles injured in traps or failed assaults will often become strict man-eaters as they are no longer fit to capture wild prey. This danger does come with respect, and many clans and noble houses will take on the saltwater crocodile as their sigil to evoke its patience and ferocity. Chimeran salties vary greatly in size. Like all crocodilians of Earth, males are substantially larger. Females average between 3 and 4 meters in length, with a weight between 1 and 200 kilos, or 2 and 4,500 pounds. Males often range between 5 and 6 meters, weighing between 500 kilos and a ton, though they maintain a steady growth, and the largest male ever reliably measured was just over 8 meters and weighed nearly 4 tons. This disparity in sexual dimorphism may seem extreme, but it is not without precedent among crocodilians today. Females need to be more nimble on land to dig nests and defend them, and the demands of nesting means that they must allocate more calories to egg production, while males can simply devote theirs to minimal activity and maximum growth. Females also favor larger bulls, naturally selecting for this disparity as well. The largest male salties of Kaimere are sometimes considered fully aquatic, not semi-aquatic, as they are very cumbersome on land, and may only come ashore a few times a year. All Chimeran crocodiles are flexible in nesting sites, but the salties are particularly versatile. Females just need a stretch of soil to dig a hole. They prefer dirt, but sand and even pebbled rubble will suffice. Sometimes they will include vegetation around the entrance, which helps to heat and incubate, but this is really only important in their southern range. She will lay between 60 and 100 eggs, often more than their Earth counterparts. The nest may seem exposed, but the mother will guard it fiercely. Bulls will sometimes stick around and guard it as well, especially older and more dominant males, which have less to fear from other threats. This gives their young a greater chance of survival than nests only guarded by a single crocodile. Mating generally takes place at the beginning of the wet season, and the eggs will be incubated and guarded for 11 to 13 weeks. Mothers directly protect their young for several months, and will offer passive defense until her next eggs hatch a year later. Though as many as 5 other species of Crocodilus can be found in and near the known world, the saltwater crocodile readily hybridizes with all of them, and since their bulls are often substantially larger than the generally 5-meter bulls in other species, salties readily are chosen by females of freshwater species where their ranges intersect. As one might expect, this creates a bit of a taxonomic nightmare. While some assembly naturalists lump all crocodiles into Crocodilus kaimerensis species complex because of this, the fact that inland species are much more distinct, most still maintain the species designation, even if the populations are not as isolated as the more striking geographic distinctions may make some species of crocodile appear on Earth today. The Suritic crocodile, for example, shares a common ancestor with salties, but are commonly regarded as distinct. They are the second largest of Chimeran crocodiles, with males sometimes reaching 7 meters at their largest, though they still average a bit smaller than salties. Suritic crocodiles are notoriously aggressive, even more so than their marine cousins, and responsible for more Chimeran deaths than any other animal in the wetlands, after snakes and mosquitoes, though it must be said that mosquito-borne diseases are far less deadly than they are to humans, thanks to the protection of Chimeran's constitutional magic. Suritic crocs are distinguished from salties by a much greener hide, but are otherwise quite similar, especially in their western range, where they are more frequently mate with saltwater crocodiles. Most true crocodiles share their ancestry with the same Asian harvests as salties. Houze crocodiles are an exception. While they have some traces of Suritic and saltwater crocodile in their southern range, most are entirely descended from Nile crocodiles harvested in the late Pleistocene. Their largest males are 6 meters long, though average in the same size range as Nile crocs of Earth. Like their Earth cousins, while they dabble in fish and local game, most of their annual caloric intake comes from the migrational season of ungulates and other large game. The main river itself is rarely crossed, but its tributaries from east and west are where the movement of game draws in the crocodiles, and in some instances, this may be the only large meal they take all year. Famine pushes the crocs to the main river, which rarely runs dry, but it is at this time that crocodiles are their most aggressive and dangerous. Another crocodile not from the Asian Pleistocene harvest is the Sheklot dwarf crocodile. These osteolaemenes are the only living member of their clade in the known world, being descended from African crocodiles that were common prior to the takeover of Caiman at the advent of the anchored period 6 million years ago. They are just over a meter long, making them the smallest Tsuchian in the known world. In contrast to their much larger kin, they are quite timid. Though their range is limited and they avoid people, the peoples of the Western Crescent report them to be common, and these little river dragons are generally regarded as a harmless sign of good luck and prolific waterways, garnering a much more positive relationship that Chimerans tend to have with other species of crocodile. Although most crocodiles in the known world belong to the Crocodilus genus, their clade does have ancestry tracing back to the harvests established during the Tyrant dynasty. This lineage in Nikar is exterminated during the dynastic extinction, but they persisted in Kairul. One clade in eastern Kairul has long forelimbs that aid in the navigating of debris in wetlands. One of these so-called winged crocodiles is the Odaga. There is a species in the Suritic wetlands and northern Nikar, but they are most abundant in the Arvelith northern wetlands. They are fairly small, the second smallest crocodiloid in the known world, at around 3 to 4 meters. For reasons unknown, they demonstrate the lowest sexual dimorphism of any Tsuchian, with males rarely more than 10% larger on average and having substantial overlap in size. When swimming in cluttered or shallow water, they often walk with their arms and push debris aside. When in open water, their arms sometimes tuck in to be more hydrodynamic, but they often spread their arms for greater stability and even occasionally stroke to aid in thrust when closing in on prey. While crocodiles are the most abundant of their kind near settled areas, and certainly best known in the known world for their lethality and their aggression, they are far from the only crocodilians in Kaimere. Throughout the anchored period, a particularly humid and warm age in Kaimere's history, it was Caiman that were the defining crocodilians. There was once a saltwater caiman, with its genetic lineage still found in many Chimeran caiman species today, though competition with salties has rendered their population extinct for over 1 million years. Caiman are a lineage of Alligatoroids. All species today descend from the late Miocene harvest of South America. Because most were replicated in the Siritic wetlands, this habitat has the highest diversity of crocodilian species, even if populations in the inland sea and Arvelith wetlands are substantially larger. The black or common caiman of Arvel has its widest range. They and black caiman of Earth share a common ancestor. They can reach 7 meters in large bulls and weigh nearly 2 tons, though females and average males are substantially smaller. Compared to crocodiles and alligators, their armor is notably stronger and their head large and sturdy, aiding the capture of large prey. Common caiman are sometimes split between Nikari and Arvelith wetland populations, though there's enough interchange that usually they are lumped together. They had an Arvelith origin back during the anchored period, but it was during the low sea levels in the aftermath that they spread north. They are no longer a resident caiman in the inland sea, though bull common caiman will sometimes venture out and hunt in crocodile territory, though they are quite cautious in this domain. With freshwater habitats in Arvel and Nikar, it is caiman that are dominant. Though not particularly aggressive, their greater size, more substantial defenses, and stronger bite coupled with far greater populations grant them clear dominance when interacting with Arvelith crocodiles. Common caiman require wetland vegetation as part of their nest for insulation, and it is theorized this requirement may have been their undoing at the conclusion of the anchored period, as during the concluding 100,000 years of cool and arid climate heavily favored the less demanding nesting strategy of the crocodiles. Caiman also lay clutches around half the size of crocodiles, so during the strained period, crocodiles won the numbers game. In the more stable conditions of modern Kaimere, the wetlands have largely returned to the reign of the caiman. The largest caiman is the giant caiman, Hrugatar. Females rarely exceed 6 or 7 meters as they must nest on land, but bulls have occasionally doubled these lengths. These caiman appear to have a wider range during the anchored period, though they are still quite abundant in the west of the known world and beyond. Their broad head and powerful jaws enable the capture and subdual of all but the largest titanosaurs in their environment, though they must still be wary of Zentaur toward the shore. Hrugatar will be covered in greater detail alongside the other 2 giant crocodilians in next week's episode. Another large caiman is the broad-snouted Nausepgen. These are common in northern Arvel, though they can be found throughout the freshwater habitats, and bulls will often venture into the seagrass meadows. They are benthic feeders, using their broad snouts and ample, narrow teeth to gather sediment and filter out crustaceans, small fish, and mollusks. Some species are only a few meters long, but the common species can exceed the length of the largest salties, with the biggest bull ever measured nearly reaching 9 meters. There are many species of smaller caiman. The Siritic caiman, for example, rarely exceeds 4 meters in the largest males. They are a very docile and popular target of chimerans living in wetlands. Unlike common and giant caiman, Siritic caiman have a rate of reproduction comparable to crocodiles, enabling them to keep pace and outnumber crocodiles in many regions. Several caiman species are even smaller, rarely reaching 2 meters. While crocodiles garner a lot of the attention for their size, there are over a dozen caiman species in the known world and its immediate vicinity, with the Arvelith northern wetlands having their greatest diversity and abundance. Alligators were the first crocodilian introduced to Kaimere after the dynastic extinction. While they have lost much of their northern range to later harvests, bringing caiman and crocodile, they generally have greater tolerance for cold, and this has benefited them substantially. There are 3 alligator species in the known world and its nearby regions. Best known is the Codgerth alligator, which is the same species we have in North America today, Alligator mississippiensis. After only 10,000 years in Kaimere, it has not speciated and they're indistinguishable from modern American gators. This was brought to Kaimere during the infamous interrupted harvest, and was one of the few megafauna to endure the later persecution of the first children and recover to a stable population after their disappearance. The Free States, Picardia, and many of the southern islands are home to a second alligator species. While they are recognized as many distinct subspecies, generally all are considered the same, Alligator kaimerensis. The gators brought from the interrupted harvest likely integrated in some capacity, but generally they avoid salt water, so interchange is not extremely common. They spread, likely from now extinct Codgerth gator, around 1.5 million years ago, when the sea levels were low and they could reach these otherwise difficult to reach islands. Generally, these gators are quite similar to American alligators. The island populations tend to be a lot smaller, though this seems less predetermined and more a matter of those in Picardia and the Free States having more space and prey to enable larger growth. Chimeran alligators are generally docile animals, even more so than American alligators, which are already quite a bit less aggressive than many crocodile species. The Picardian and Caline will hunt and eat them. Both cultures generally regard the consumption of species known to be man-eaters as taboo, so while crocodile meat is abhorred, they both readily incorporate alligator into their diet, as it is extremely rare for Chimeran gators to even scavenge Chimeran bodies. The waterways along southern Arvel are home to a third alligator species, Alligator nemantra. Not much is known about them in comparison to the other 2 gator species in Kaimere. They tend to be a lighter brown color rather than the black of Codgerth and Picardian gators, but their skeletal anatomy is nearly indistinguishable. Despite this, hybrids are entirely unknown between them and the other 2 species, suggesting a more ancient ancestry, perhaps going back to the first harvest after the dynastic extinction, whereas the Picardian species were harvested from the ancestor of modern gators 8 million years ago. They are generally wary of people, and the local tribes describe them as game and even companions, a striking contrast to the cultural perceptions of crocodiles in the warmer half of the known world. Alligatoroids have a much more ancient history in Kaimere than the Miocene. This clade was quite successful throughout the Tyrant dynasty. Though the Chimeran line of Alligatoroids was wiped out in the known world, they persist in Hyrule with several families evolving from ancestral stock. Most famous of them are the tusked alligators, one of which is found in the known world, being a recent migrant from Hyrule within the past million years or so, and has become one of the top predators of the Siritic wetlands. They will be covered in more detail in next week's episode. The third clade of crocodilians today are represented by the Gharials. They are best known for long narrow jaws specialized in rapid capture of small prey, usually fish. Small prey, of course, being relative, as small game to a 20-foot gharial would be a large fish to us. Genetic studies suggest they are closer to crocodiles than either group is to alligatoroids. Though only 2 are found on Earth today, the clade is much more diverse in Kaimere. Though the modern gharial appears to have come to Kaimere during the Pleistocene, they do not have any living descendants. The Gharials of Kaimere in the known world are all descended from the Miocene of South America. Most are of the Griposuchian clade, though the enormous Gen might belong to an independent clade that came to South America from Asia in a separate radiation, and may therefore be closer related to our modern gharials than it is to the more ancient South American clade. This will be discussed in more detail next week. Griposuchids are a clade of gharial well known throughout the second half of the Cenozoic and have several living species in Kaimere. Best known is the Trachayam fisher croc. This marine, coastal, and estuarine gharial approaches the saltwater crocodile in size, though they are far less aggressive and target much smaller prey. A 7-meter bull may not seek out people as prey, but we do fall under their designation as small game. A few children have been claimed by particularly massive bulls, but it must be said that this is a very rare occurrence. The Suritic fisher croc is the most abundant crocodilian in its environment. At 4 to 5 meters, they are much smaller than their saltwater fisher croc kin, though like the Suritic crocodiles and salties, they are known to hybridize with their marine cousins in their estuarine range. The diversity of crocodilians can share in their environment is substantial, especially in the Suritic wetlands. Being harvested during the crocodile golden age at the end of the Miocene certainly helped, as did being replicated in a fairly clean slate analogous habitat. Though they have of course integrated and thrived in other regions, this is where the most species of crocodilian can be found. While there is plenty of niche partitioning, there of course has been some regional and even total extinctions. The arid period 1.5 million years ago heavily favored crocodiles, but the Caiman regime has recovered much of their lost territory. They are dependent upon generally humid conditions and ample wetlands to call home, but there are clearly enough fish, mammals, dinosaurs, and other prey and near the water that many of these crocs can partition with minimal overlap. In a given region, their biodiversity is not unprecedented compared to the most productive croc formations in our own prehistory. Ontogeny is another way in which crocodiles occupy many niches. As juveniles, most crocodilians, regardless of ancestry, are insectivores, and juveniles generally are restricted to small fish. While crocodilians care for their young as much as the first year of their lives, this is generally restricted to protection. They don't feed them. This is quite similar to protection shown in many non-bird dinosaurs in Kaimere, where parents protect, but don't provide sustenance. Although Eusuchians are the only clade of Pseudosuchian to survive in modern times on Earth, this is not the case in Kaimere. Two clades of herbivorous Protosuchians have representatives in the known world. Most famous is a recent migrant from the Permian Islands, the Odaga or Sloth crocodile. These bipedal herbivores have drawn comparison to the fictional kaiju Godzilla as a bipedal semi-aquatic giant reptile, though it must be said the largest males reach around 4 meters tall. The Odaga is dramatically smaller. The osteoderms on their back are primarily a display feature, though it has been proposed they serve a thermoregulatory function, and that may well be the case in small degrees, though the thick layer of keratin over their bony cores prevents easy shedding or buildup of heat if the blood vessels were only protected by a thin layer of skin. They are endothermic and have high nutritional demands. The oboke feed on a wide range of fruit, leaves, and seagrass. Odaga are social animals, with herds of a dozen or so related females remaining together, and bachelors, a few males, will often accompany one another, with only the largest and oldest males sticking it out on their own. It must be said these elders are often found in loose approximation to a bachelor herd. Kurojaku are the only predators large enough to threaten the largest bulls in the inland sea, though Centaur and the giant crocodilians can bring them down when they wander into freshwater marshes to feed. Odaga are not particularly fast or agile swimmers or runners. Often, they must fight. Because of this, the claws on their flexible arms, adapted for browsing, are secondarily adapted as weapons. Their beaks are not particularly specialized for combat, but they can deliver a strong and crushing bite to restrain an opponent, while their claws deliver deep, raking wounds. Odaga are not aggressive animals, and the combat is a last resort after a bellowing display and formation within others of their kind, but they can be proficient combatants when pressed. Their ancestors were terrestrial and freshwater herbivores, so they must expel the excess salt they ingest while feeding on seagrass, which can make up as much as 70 to 80% of their diet if in the Crocodian, and often the browsing opportunities are limited to mangrove trees, which themselves secrete an excess of salt. Like marine iguanas, they have specialized glands which remove salt from their blood, enabling them to endure the vast quantities of saltwater and saline plants they ingest. While they regularly sneeze out built-up salt so their glands don't get swollen, they often store some to be sneezed at terrestrial predators at a final deterrence. This salty moisture can be projected as far as 5 meters in healthy adults. This has been reported to be quite successful at defusing a potential fight, especially if the predator is hit in the face. Certainly not as lethal as their claws, but in the pacifist philosophy of the Odaga, a fight avoided is a fight won. Another perhaps surprising Pseudosuchian are the burrowing turtle crocs, or Chelyssuchians. They evolved into recognizable forms of their modern representatives back during the Jurassic, and like our Crocs today, found a reliable lifestyle and body plan with little need for variation. There are 2 clades in modern Kaimere, the terrestrial Testudocampsids and the semi-aquatic Chelyssuchids. At 1 meter long, the burrowing Yogrotu is the largest representative of the terrestrial Testudocampsids and is found throughout the western mountains of the crescent. Smaller species and related genera are found throughout the northern half of the known world. They are solitary and will tolerate other burrows near their own. Unsurprisingly, they are low browsers and take almost any form of vegetation they can get, though they struggle to digest grass and therefore favor forests with ample fern and horsetail thickets. Their burrows are believed to have helped them survive the dynastic extinction, as small Testudocampsids are some of the few native fauna found in the immediate aftermath of Nikar's extinction. The second clade are the Chelyssuchids. The wug is around the same size as the Yogrotu, though they are larger thanks to a tail convergently similar to many modern Crocs. They also live in burrows, though spend a lot of their time in the water foraging for wetland vegetation. They are ectothermic, so don't need nearly as much food as a mammal or dinosaur herbivore of the same size, but a slow pace means that it can take them a while to get between food sources. Unlike the Yogrotu, they will take on carrion if the opportunity presents itself. While they have not been truly domesticated, the peoples of the Siritic wetlands will often keep wug near their settlements. They can eat almost anything, so are excellent at cleaning up leftovers and other compost, as they are amiable temperament around people, so not much of a concern to be kept around. They will become territorial if they're reliable food sources, and the surplus means they will breed and defend the area, so often serve as an albeit limited form of protection. Their deep, rumbling warning calls are a reliable alarm of danger worth a village's investigation, as wug will simply hiss and charge at smaller opponents. Though an icon of the Siritic wetlands, the wug is assumed to be a relatively recent arrival from Hyrule, where this clade is much more abundant. A smaller species of the same genus is found in the rivers and wetlands of the Western Crescent, though known world representatives of this lineage seem to be endemic to the Crescent as a whole, coming from the eastern basins into the Crescent as the Hanju, Renjuyo, and many other Hyrulean semi-aquatic species have within the past million years or so. Cheers to Darius and Red Lichen for sponsoring this episode. As mentioned last week, I accidentally double-booked the episode, thinking that one of them had sponsored the prehistoric Pseudosuchian episode. Next week, we'll meet the 3 largest Crocodilians of Kaimere, the tusked Hanju, the giant Caiman Biodiversity, and the colossal Gharial Gen. Thanks again to my sponsors, for my Patreon patrons for your support, and thank you for watching. Stay fantastic, everyone. Cheers, folks!